The next step in the minds of both parties is closing. So what's going to happen when the seller says, "Are you willing to commit to the next step?" and the prospect or buyer says, "No." Will the seller next say, "Oops, I didn't grow the need big enough. I need to jump backward and ask some more questions"? That's not going to happen because it's counterintuitive. Both parties expect closing is the next step. For that reason, you must always grow the need first before any mention of your product is introduced. Next, let's give names to these two different types of needs. We're going to call the small ones potential needs because they have the potential for us to be able to sell something at some point in the future. We're going to call the big ones pressing because the buyer, in their mind, feels pressed to make a decision in order to solve a problem, in order to reach a goal, in order to fulfill an aspiration. Most of the needs that we run into are small. In fact, a vast majority of the needs that we run into are potential needs. We would call pressing needs that we stumble into the low-hanging fruit. And you know in today's environment how often that happens. Not very often. So ultimately, you've got three choices. Number one, you sit in your office by the phone and you wait for pressing needs to come across your door. Number two, you go out looking for pressing needs. Except in reality, those don't exist in great quantity. So the other option is this. By all means, react to pressing needs when they come your way. But the other challenge is to be so good at listening that you hear these small nuggets, that is the potential needs, and you're able to grow them in the mind of the people you're selling to. If you are able to do that, they start looking at you differently. If you are so good at listening that you discover potential needs and you grow them in the mind of your prospects or buyers, they start looking at you as a consultant instead of the way that most sellers are viewed, and that is as product pushers. It is part of the reason that selling to this day has a bad name when people are asked, what job or vocation do you trust the least? Sales continues to come out very low on that list. You really want to get good at this process? Ask yourself the question, what does the need sound like when people are ready to buy? And then ask this question, what does that need sound like a month before that, 3 months before that, a year before that? That's your goal. Get so good at discovering these needs when they are absolutely tiny, and that will create both a selling advantage for you and a competitive advantage as well. Now let's talk about the phases or the different steps in selling that will be covered in future modules. We don't call the first step of this process cold calling. We call it introductory calling. It doesn't necessarily have to be cold, and there are 11 different things you can do to get good at this part of the process, whether you call it introductory calling, cold calling, or prospecting. Those topics will be discussed in future modules. We'll talk about the opening ceremony and its ability to set the tone and to be used as a launching pad for the call. In future modules, we'll talk about a 4-step probing model that will help you discover potential needs and grow them into pressing needs. This 4-step probing model is tested. It is applicable in almost any sales situation that you face. There are certain situations you face where the need is already big in the mind of your prospect or buyer, but for some reason, they are not yet ready to pull the trigger. That could be because the need isn't completely clear in their mind, and that is another responsibility of the seller to help bring pressing needs into sharp focus. That also gives you an opportunity to shape the way they make the decision. In future sessions, we'll talk about how to present solutions verbally and why so many sellers end up selling the benefits of their products that apply to potential needs where they should be selling proven benefits to pressing needs. In future modules, we'll talk about our chat model for handling objections and concerns that come up anywhere during the sales process. In upcoming modules, we'll talk about what happens when the need is large and you need to compete for a piece of business. Now it's about the decision process. It is an entirely different probing process, and yet a critical probing process it is. When you're involved in a competitive sale, what is typically necessary is that you modify your solution before you submit it, whether in verbal or written form. We'll introduce a tool called our Proactive Strategy Guide, which will not only help you to look at the competitive environment, but to present yourself as the best organization capable of handling your prospect or buyer's needs, and how that will lead you to playing the game in a different way. Finally, we'll talk about closing, gaining client commitment to the next step. I wish I could tell you there is magic that happens at this stage of the game, but in many cases, closing is critical, but it ought to be an administrative part of the process based on all the steps you've taken up to that point. In summary, as it applies to the biggest mistakes that salespeople make. Number one, asking questions keeps your prospect talking and allows you to focus on them instead of focusing on you. Remember, selling is not telling. Number two, don't sell too soon. Most sellers don't recognize that needs come in all different sizes, and most of them are not big enough to justify the solution you want to present early in the process. Number three, grow the need as big as you can before you mention the product that you sell. Following these three steps will put you on the path to sales effectiveness and success. Thanks for listening in, and we'll talk to you in other modules.